So it still backs up. Real wonky slide, just to show you that these are the kinds of things the Transportation Department looks at. Remember, it's not our decision. They make a whole host of evaluations on what is being proposed and how to look at it. But importantly, our local roads and our collector roads. So what's a collector and a local? A collector is a road that is used for the neighborhood to move onto, to get out of the neighborhood, to access to a higher level road. Think Broadway to Bayview, or Brentcliffe to Eglinton. Local roads are all the other smaller roads around. Think every other road. So property is the primary access function for local roads. Clearly it's failing on that front because people can't get into their driveways, right? Collectors kind of marry the two, a little bit halfway maybe. Local roads like to have less than 2,500 cars is an issue, and collector roads between 25 and 8,000 depending on the size of the road and retail, all sorts of other things that go into it. We violate all of this. Okay? Won't make you deal with that anymore. This is sort of a graphic representation of those things. One point we want to pull out of this is the Canadian Institute of Traffic Engineers states that collector roads, think of Broadway going to Brentcliffe, are not supposed to be transit pathways through neighborhoods. The concept is you have children who are running around, people who are walking on streets, and they're less attuned and less aware of the issues of traffic and vehicles. When you're walking on Eglinton, your guard's up. So you're prepared for this kind of stuff. You don't often see children playing ball hockey on Eglinton, right? So that's what this means, the property access and the priority. And that's, sorry, couldn't get the map forward. So north is this way, right? So there you see the Broadway as a collector, Laird as a collector, and these are the locals, okay? One of the things we want to point out here, and one of the things that we suffer with at Broadway, is Broadway runs parallel to Eglinton all the way past Yonge. And it acts as a wonderful transit to get past city traffic, cutting through neighborhood roads and blasting past any kind of arterial backup. That's a problem because it's a straight shot, so it's easy to visualize. South Leaside has a tremendous number of problems. Some of them are collector road related. Like us, South has other problems in terms of the porosity, entry and exit points to the neighborhood. We don't have as many of those issues because we've got these natural barriers of the ravine protecting our north and east flank. So we just deal with our south and our western borders as that infiltration component. That's going to come forward in some of our analysis and thinking. As part of that 2014 study, the Transportation Department warned the LRT folks and the Eglinton Connect folks that when the proposition is to redesign, and that is happening, to redesign Eglinton as a road. Okay, now we're very dependent on our arterial road in terms of how traffic affects us. They're going to take away one lane from Eglinton. When you take away one lane, the idea is that 13% of the traffic eastbound, westbound kind of drops off that lane. 3% of it looks for the next arterial road to the north or south, 1% on the bottom. This study was done at Yonge and Eglinton, and 10% of it flows into here. Why is this diamond oblonged and funny shape here? That's because that's Broadway. It's a nice, easy road to get. Now, I'm going to ask for your imaginations again. Slide that diamond to Bayview and Eglinton. Take away a lane, right? How are you going to get to Lawrence? People don't know about the cut-through on Lawrence that goes through Post Road. It's not easy to visualize. So this traffic isn't going to look to go north. It's going to look to go in here to jump the queues. How are you going to go to St. Clair? It doesn't exist to our south at Bayview and Eglinton. St. Clair is gone. You have to go to Danforth to cross over, or maybe Pottery Road at the bottom of the Bayview extension. Similarly, to go north in clarity of mind, it's York Mills. So this diamond is a fatter shape at Bayview and Eglinton rather than at Yonge and Eglinton. So these are our hotspots. This is where it backs up. This is where a lot of traffic comes in. We'll talk about the traffic flows here. It's coming up. So Metrolinx, one of the things we did was complain at Metrolinx with all the construction and everything else. And they did a traffic study for us and did counts and got us lots of updates. And those 2015 updates were really important, and they helped us with the Transportation Department. Each of these stars is where they did counts. and came with information. And you don't have to go through the detail of this. It's a relational slide. That's Broadway. Each of these are the intersections. Basically, the blacker the box, the more traffic is going through it relationally to the greener boxes. And by the way, at the time that was done, so this is Sutherland. Sutherland had the grout plant, and unfortunately, we didn't get that one done. That was an oversight. But point being, we had these counts. That gave us an up-to-date, and these are the results. So the results show, remember that wonky slide a few slides back that had the 2,500 limit? Oops, oops, oops. And that's the grout plant. So clearly our local roads are violating policy in terms of road usage, in terms of volume. And when you get down to 2,500 to 8,000, it doesn't have to be 8,000 for Broadway and Laird. These were our counts. And we argue, because we have a grid, if you ripped away the overages on all of this and just took them down to 2,500 and tacked it on to Broadway, because that's how people are just not using Broadway because they're getting caught up, so they're trying to jump the queue kind of thing. These numbers would be, again, in violation of how much traffic should be done. The Transportation Department has admitted to us that Broadway is operating as a minor arterial. No turn signals. So we ask people not to turn right onto Bayview at Broadway and at Glenvale. 156 cars an hour in the afternoon, ignore that. 156 cars an hour in the afternoon over the course of the 3-hour rush hour. Ignore that. That's a live count. 81 hours, ignore the Broadway. This is left and right. They're added together. And the AM is similarly bad. So drivers aren't following the rules. They aren't just roll stopping at intersections. They aren't just blowing through on occasion. We don't see a lot of blow-throughs on intersections. They're certainly ignoring the no right turns. And that's a problem because it doesn't keep the traffic out of the neighborhood. It was implemented many years ago as part of a traffic calming process to keep the traffic out of the neighborhood. It's not doing it. So everybody says, well, enforcement. Well, if you all came to the enforcement town hall that the councillor had last year, they were very clear on many things. And I think they did themselves a disservice by not making this clear. Do you know that 53rd Division serves 8 city wards and 14 communities? They're not here to serve just Leaside. We're just part of what they're doing. It is a huge effort for these people, and they work real hard to do it. The officers were clear that dedicated traffic cops have been decreasing over 25 years. The police is the largest line item on our city budget. That councillors can't direct police. That 52nd Division has only 2 officers dedicated to traffic, 8 wards, 14 communities. And by the way, we, as a community, only complained for 8% of the results. So he pulled out a little street and showed us how many complaints. And yeah, we could all get on the phone and complain more, but get ready to do that for the rest of your lives, because it's every day they do the reports, okay? So it's unreasonable to assume that every street corner can be policed, and even with compliance, we still have volume, even if we got everybody to comply. So what are traffic calming measures? Traffic calming measures are actually a set of laws and policy that the city has to follow, the Transportation Services Department, the councillor, everybody. And it has a series of tools that you can use. And I'm not going to bore you guys by telling you about all the tools. We pulled out a few. Diverters, this is called a diverter. This is a cul-de-sac. Some call it a road closure. This is a curb extension. You can see examples of this in other neighborhoods that we brought out. This slide is for when you go online. If you really want to get into this stuff, you can click on the links and go check it out. So we're going to talk about the use of those traffic calming measures a little bit in the future. First of all, let's talk about the future of Leaside. So we know this is coming, right? And we know that that's what it used to be, and that's what it more looks like now in certain parts. The LRT everybody knows what the LRT is. The point we want to point out is that these intensification areas, if you haven't been highly involved in looking at the way the development is happening, an intensification area is an area that was designated by the city to have extra residents. And they changed the zoning to get extra residents, and that's why the condo applications come. And we've got 2 of them in our neighborhood, Laird and Bayview. This is the roads that we were talking about. So from Bayview to Laird, they're going to lose that dedicated bus lane. And from Laird to Brentcliffe, there's going to be a center lane that is used for turning left or right, but not general commuting. So we're losing that lane. So remember that diamond chart? That's what's happening, right? We're losing that lane, and that traffic's going to want to go somewhere, and that diamond doesn't let them really go to a non-existent St. Clair. This is a city-published thing in the early stages of the LRT. I don't think this went around Leaside enough. This is Laird, this is Eglinton, and these are the high-rises that are proposed. By the way, this application here, 939, is a lot more high-rises than even they put on. So you should worry about that kind of stuff. We are making a lot of efforts to keep our eyes on what kind of roads might be proposed to be added in this block so they don't line up with Don Avon, and worst case, we get another signalized intersection, just another way for traffic to get into the community. So we're doing a lot of stuff in the background. So this is what it could look like. This is the part where we scare you. So each number in a box represents a building and the height of that building. So the stuff we really want to take your attention to, I hope I'm not blocking your view here, but we want to take your attention to, this is the 939 site, 22, 26, 29, and then two smaller buildings, 7 and 18. The Canadian Tire site has put in an application. There's a 26, 34, and then a series of smaller buildings. You have our Sunnybrook Plaza stuff that most of you are aware of, some smaller stuff going on in South. And then out by Leslie, we've got recently approved 29, 39, and 45-story buildings. That's at Leslie, right? So you live out in Leslie, yeah, you can drive to the Loblaws at Don Mills. You can go to shops at Don Mills and find no parking. Or you can drive into Leaside and go to Longo's and everywhere else. We care about that stuff. That's going to mean more traffic. Celestica site, 8 new high-rises, 24 to 40 stories, and a mid-rise. Yeah, okay, so maybe they're probably not going to go shop at Longo's because Loblaws is right beside them, but they want to go to Home Depot. They're coming into Leaside. You know, it's not that we want to prevent them from coming into Leaside. It's for everybody to use, but it does mean that puts traffic pressure and that bumps additional traffic into the interior of the neighborhood. And we all know how dangerous that is now because we've been through those reports. So, all right. A lot of stuff here. Don't get too worried. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it. This is North Leaside and the Eglinton corridor. This is just an estimate of this is an estimate, and it's an aggressive estimate. We didn't go out a chart. We could argue this, but we didn't also go soft. So we estimated number of residents that could be added on this corridor, number of parking spaces. This is South Leaside additions. So that would be total Leaside additions, all of Leaside, 8,500 new potential residents, 4,500 new parking spaces, 10 new high-rises, 11 new med-rises. And then when you take Leaside adjacent, that's the Leslie Street and the Celestica, that number jumps to 17,000 new potential residents, 21 potential new high-rises, 14 new mid-rises. Everybody's shaking their head and getting uncomfortable. Yeah. So these are all the developments we're talking about. Those are the additions. Remember the 8,500? That's the current population of Leaside. So you can juxtapose and get a sense. Units as houses. These are condos, right? You get a feel for it. Here's the population of North Leaside, 3,500 people. Most of these people are going to be living on your doorstep. That's what the councillor said when he said earlier, when it's time to vote this stuff in the future, they will have a vote, right? They don't necessarily live inside the community, but what councillor can ignore 8,500 votes? Think about that. So future of Leaside, 46%. Just looking at the Leaside side, add the additions, we could see a doubling of the population. And if you thought that was bad, none of those numbers include any of these buildings. Remember the question marks on the couple of slides back? Weren't any numbers in the box? That's because we don't know. Air rights over Leaside Station, the metro site. We don't know if something's going to get built there. It's not even in our ward, but it's a big piece of land. Hyde Park Plaza, that's what a Lowry's is. We don't know if anything's going to go there. It's 1.5 times the size of 939 development. Right? We don't know. I'm not saying it's happening there. The numbers on the previous slide don't include the impact from this. And if you thought that was bad, still not done. Retail and commercial. Costco. Smart Center North, right? To the north of Home Depot, which there might be a Walmart going in there. So that's not just us going to that. I mean, great, we've got extra shopping, but so does everybody else in the area, and it gives them a reason to come into the neighborhood, drive through the neighborhood, cut through the neighborhood, add on to everything that we've already shown you, which is historical. So what's the implications of all of this? Significant construction is going to be ever present for a decade or more. That's coming. And we need to be ready for it. LRT-related intensification is going to increase Leaside area population, as you saw from the previous slides, even if they were slightly aggressive estimates, and most of which are going to be located on the Eglinton corridor. We care about that because that, if they were all somewhere else further away, it might not impact as much what we may want to do on the interior of the neighborhood. Nope, they're there, and they're going to care. They're going to want to drive through to go to Whole Foods, right? Why not? Neighborhood traffic infiltration from those new local residents. I just said it. But here's the biggest part, the voting dynamics. It's going to change. So now is the time to vote a solution. Now's the time. Not 5 years from now, not get into a fight. We're going to see some stuff here. We're not proposing easy stuff. We're proposing effective stuff. So when you see it, bear that part in mind. You may not have a choice in the future. So what did we do? Well, we put a lot of work into it. Came up with 16 potential solutions. We looked at historical proposals. We looked at neighborhood-wide ideas. We looked at city-wide ideas. We considered protecting the hotspots, doing things to address the hotspots, but protect the important areas of the neighborhood as well, like North Lee School with the preponderance of kids. And we check things always past the councillor, past the city services departments, past transportation. Came up with 2 resulting proposals, whittled them down, thought about them, voted them. Cul-de-sacs and one-way maze are the terms we're using to identify them. We'll get to those in a minute. We also wanted to make it easier on everybody to make this difficult decision. First of all, we operated off the premise that physical barriers are 100% effective. Remember all those 150 an hour turn restriction violations that no one's following, how people blow through? Driver behavior in Toronto's gotten worse. I don't blame the drivers, I blame the level of traffic. You make a lot more traffic, people get upset, they get rushed, they get stressed, they drive badly. So barriers are effective. Signage, not so much. So what could we do to ease ourselves into this new change? Well, we got, and this is wonderful, the councillor and transportation services agreed to let us try something temporarily. One of the 2 options we're proposing has an ability to shut it down if we don't like it afterwards. So we're proposing it first as a temporary option and a second vote to make it permanent. We'll come to that in a minute. We're going to stagger the rollout. A lot of hubris is involved in someone that thinks they can solve all of our traffic problems in one set of ideas. So we want to whittle this down to try one thing, measure the traffic, figure out how we have to adapt to deal with it, and then move on. You'll see what I'm talking about in a minute. We don't want to be relying on policing for the previous slides that we described. They do hard work, there's just limits. And finally, a path to permanency. So let's start talking about first what are the actual traffic dynamics that are happening in our neighborhood. So we've broken them down into 4 categories. We call them bypass Bayview and Eglinton intersection. So Eglinton intersection gets all clogged up, right? Even before the construction, by the way, right? You saw the volume slide go up. Many of those were done prior to construction starting in early 2015. So this isn't just a construction-related matter. So people come along. The blue lines are basically indicate folks pop into the neighborhood. Maybe they'll pop in here, maybe they'll pop in here, maybe they'll pop in here. And their view ultimately is to head up Bayview, and rather than going the whole way down, they cross and choose whatever method. We kind of think of traffic like water, right? So it chooses its easiest path. If something blocks up, they can quickly, particularly in a grid, it's easy to do. Parallel Eglinton Avenue. That's back to the comment of how Broadway works all its way down past Yonge. And if you have an intention to do so, why take Eglinton when it's all clogged up? Let's jump onto Broadway. There are times in the last year where Eglinton has been empty of cars and Broadway's been full. So it's also a learned behavior. People don't even try anymore. They just go through. Of course, we all suffer on the internals because of that. Eglinton queue jumpers. Okay, so this is all about very specific to our little slice of heaven, where as soon as traffic backs up on Eglinton, people pop into the neighborhood, and Don Lee sees the worst of this traffic, and they choose to go as far as they can across and come down. By the way, a driver mentality when they do this is almost akin to aggressive driving. They jump in, and the idea is to get ahead. The idea is to go quick. The idea is to push. They're already aggravated by traffic. That's not good conditions to be driving on the inside of a neighborhood. Similarly, you get it in the reverse direction. Very easy to pop in and come out Don Lee and move across. So Don suffers a lot in that regard. Further, if you've ever seen, I'm sure you've seen, the traffic that piles up on PM rush hour on Laird as people are headed north, well, they know ultimately they're going to be heading east or west on Eglinton. There have been times when the traffic has been piled all the way up on Whitstead, and they can't get that way, they can't make the right turn, so they pop into the neighborhood and cruise out to Brentcliffe and come across and do the same in the other direction. We call that Eglinton queue jumpers. And then there's Bayview Avenue queue jumpers, the fourth. And this is, we don't have the full slide of the neighborhood, but when you come up from the DVP and Bayview starts to plug up and your ultimate desire is to head north, you pop in at Sutherland, you pop in at Millwood, you pop in at McRae, and they figured out that they can take Rumsey and cruise up and end up in the neighborhood and pop out. Okay, so those are the four primary traffic patterns that we've seen that are happening. So what are we trying to do with all of that? All of that information. We want to put something that maximizes impact. That's the best way to get buy-in from transportation. We want to do something that minimizes our disruption. Nobody wants to be inconvenienced, but at some level, remember the no silver bullet slide that was playing earlier? There is nothing everything will have trade-offs. And minimize cost, because even if we select all of this, even if the council approves it, even if community council approves it, it can get shot down in budget. So let's not go asking for all sorts of bells and whistles and have budget turn it down. Then we're back to square one and, oh, the new residents have moved in. This is all part of an overall strategy. So don't need to go heavily on this. This is the standalone. If you go and look at it afterwards, it speaks to the concept of temporary try before you buy. Put something in place for 6 months to a year and pull it out. And then phased. So if we find new things, here's how we'll deal with it. So let's get to the meat. Option 1, cul-de-sac. What does that look like? Why did we do it? Well, so these blue bars represent effectively creating a cul-de-sac at Glenvale, Broadway, and Craig. The idea is no traffic passes. Can't go east, can't go west. You saw those 4 traffic patterns we indicated? That nabs a massive portion of the infiltration traffic that's happening. It comes with inconveniences. I'm not going to lie to you. It is there. But it also, we want you to look through a fair lens. Don't just say, I can't get through there, and I go through there a lot. And by the way, a number of NLTC members go through that intersection on a daily basis. So we're not picking stuff that, just we like. Look at the fact that, 1, when you want to get out of the neighborhood, let's say for Saturday shopping, that traffic isn't all going to be there that you see before. Also note that when it's time to commute, if your view is to head up north on Bayview, you can also head up north on Leslie. Leslie's a faster road. The speed limits are faster. There's less traffic on Leslie. And by the way, when you pull out all of that infiltration traffic, this won't plug up at Brentcliffe. You can get out of the neighborhood. And you're on to Eglinton, and a quick pop up to Leslie, and you're moving north. So that we want you to keep in mind, that those trade-offs don't just include the extra safety of not having all those vehicles doing all that crazy stuff on the interior of the neighborhood. It also gives you the ability it also gives you those other benefits. In addition, we've made an effort to drive this just of ourselves. And the delays have ranged from 2 minutes. The worst we ever came across was 9 minutes. And, yes, there's a little bit of a wait. Okay. It won't be like that forever when the construction goes away. The construction is only there for another 1.5 years. The LRT won't complete, but the stuff they're doing here is anticipated to be 1.5 years. Then that will ameliorate, and this will open up. Okay? The second part is a second vote to make permanent. So that's the temporary part. So how are we going to do this temporarily? Well, we're going to use Jersey barriers. Jersey barriers is those concrete barriers that you see that they use all over to define construction lanes. They're not the prettiest things in the world, but they're effective. It's 100% effective. It's a natural barrier. What could a full implementation look like? Well, we've talked with the transportation. They haven't confirmed that they're going to do this, and we would have to vote this. So none of this is out of a vote, right? Sorry. So we've talked about maybe putting parquets. So there's a parquet up here. Maybe we can get a parquet at the front end of this road, which would add to that, make it a larger park. That would serve more utility for the people in this part of the neighborhood. We could put one in front of the church as a parquet. Who knows? With the Whole Foods, maybe you come there and you eat lunch, a little lunch seating. Who knows? I mean, parquets. right? Whole Foods got great takeout. And then Craig Crescent could also have a parkette. So there's a way to beautify the ultimate. I'm not saying it's going to be that has budgetary conditions, that has engineering conditions. There's all sorts of pieces to that. But it won't always look at those jerseys, and we can pull the jerseys out if, after the 6 month to a year period, we all hate it. So that's about as flexible as you're ever going to get in government. The phased stuff we were talking about before. So remember that Eglinton queue jumping stuff? We have no way to evaluate how much of that traffic is from the infiltration side and how much of it is that jumping in, right? Because we didn't stand there and count and license plates and stuff like that. If Eglinton queue jumping continues to be a problem and the community is prepared to vote on it, then this is an example. It doesn't have to be this. So you can basically, when the vote comes up at some point in the future, you're not voting on this at this point. You're just voting on the blue. But the idea is we could manage it. And if you play through the traffic flows as previously discussed, this creates enough of a hindrance for those vehicles to stop it. So if you're living on Don Lee, we haven't abandoned you. But this is that second phase to figure out, one of our NLTC members lives on Don Lee, that we can address it. And maybe getting rid of all that infiltration traffic will address it anyways. Transportation likes that idea of phased approach. It's responsible. We would measure it with those tubes. We'd measure the condition before they got put in. So right after this got put in, we'd lay tubes at strategic points. Before this gets put in, we lay tubes at strategic points to take a current traffic condition. We put this in, we lay tubes again at a future point, measure it again. We've got real hard data. So it's not guesswork. It's not what someone wants in the NLTC. This is driven by facts. If we find that there's still a speeding problem, this was a concept that kind of links into some of the stuff being discussed by Kathleen Wynne with respect to photo radar, which may or may not happen and all that kind of stuff. This could be added, again, not part of this vote, where we could consider reducing the speed limit to 30 kilometers an hour in and around the school because of all that pedestrian traffic that was discussed. They're just things to think about. We want to let you know that's how phasing could look. So let's go to idea number two. Let's talk about the pros and cons. So the pros and cons are it's temporary, inexpensive, simple, easy to get, right? Just the blue lines, you get it. You don't get confused, highly effective. Minimal EMS delay. These would be designed so EMS can pass through. It's called high curbs. There are various other things you can do, but you don't want to do it with your car. Initial out-of-area driver confusion, that's a con. People aren't going to read the sign, you can't get access to Bayview. But that's only going to happen at the beginning. They'll quickly get it. So be prepared for the first 2 weeks if we vote it in, then it's going to be mayhem. But after the first 2 weeks, that learned driver behavior will go away. And then it inconveniences the westbound and northbound traffic. However, I explain how that is mitigated. Option two. Option two is a one-way system. I'm going to be clear, the NLTC prefers option one for a whole host of reasons. We're putting up option two. We knocked out 14 other options. We're putting up option two because so many people asked about one ways. And it's natural. If you grew up in this community and you think of Danforth, which is what everybody was thinking about, right? You see, there's no traffic inside those areas. I drive in there all the time looking for parking when I want to do some Danforth shopping. Well, the design of the neighborhood is different. It doesn't work as easily. They don't have a school sitting in the middle, whereas you try to play with all these runways and you end up driving traffic past the school. Nightmare. Don't want to do that. So this is one rendition, a pretty good one, of what a one-way system might look like. The length of the arrow is the part of the road that would be one-way. The direction of the arrow is obviously the direction in which the one-way is. So this would be a two-way road. And this would be a two-way road. So you're all playing, okay, where do I live? How would I get home? Exactly. But exactly, that's the problem with this. It's confusing. Now imagine, you're going to get used to that. But imagine every infiltration traffic, because you can still get from this part to this part. Imagine every infiltration traffic that doesn't know how to navigate that. We're going to have drivers circling around in our neighborhood like crazy, not knowing where to go. Bad idea. That's why we don't like the one-ways. Another reason we don't like the one-ways, GPS. Today's modern technology, people can figure out one-ways. They just have to drive it once and they can go back to their GPS and pull the same thing over again. So So one-ways create challenges. Things could move around here if you're like, oh my God, I got to drive around the block if I do that. But generally speaking, the simplicity and the clarity of option one, the definitiveness of the removal of transient traffic, the benefits of safety that go along with it. We estimate there's probably somewhere between 10 and 12,000 cars a day going through the neighborhood. But remember that our local volume is 1,500, 1,700 cars. So we're 1/15th as local volume. You take away all those cars, you get all the safety benefits that go with it. Presumably people aren't aggressively trying to jump a queue because they can't. So we've gotten rid of that bad behavior. Again, if needs be, if this is where the community wants to go, then we could talk about 30 kilometer an hour in a future stage, in a future development. The way through this, by the way, is you have to go up here, you have to go up here, you have to cut across here, and then work your way down and pop out. I mean, the whole idea is to inconvenience so much that you don't want to do it, right? That's the whole idea. But will it stop people? Not 100% certain. So the pros and cons, the cons are heavier, right? EMS delay, cheaters. Oh yeah, cheaters. Concern that if you live here, whoops, you might just sneak in and go into your parking lot. We don't want people doing that. That's a safety concern. So EMS delay, cheaters, inconvenient, increases speeders if it's only a one-way. Remember we talked about the parking and oncoming facing traffic? If you get rid of that over the part of a one-way, people will drive faster. We don't like that idea. Driver confusion, no temporary alternative. Can't make it temporary. Can be defeated by GPS. The positives are it's cheap. It's really cheap. And allows for westbound, northbound access. And it may reduce some volume.